Yes, folks, it's Tales from the Jails with John G. Sutton. I'm going to talk today about the hospital service in the prisons. It's no longer run by prison officers, it's run by the National Health Service that are seconded into the prisons. But when I was there, hospital officers ran the service, along with doctors, of course, but the doctors were full-time employees of the Home Office. Every prison had its own senior medical officer, well, every major prison. And there was a senior medical officer at Strangeways, and a number of other doctors, some of whom had practices outside of the prison. But generally speaking, the hospital service in the prisons, that's for all minor problems, stuff like headaches, diarrhea, wounds. They're all stitched up by hospital officers, of which I was a hospital officer myself. A bit of a strange idea, really, when you think about it, because I had all of 3 months training, 12 weeks, and then I was into the hospital service, administering medication, taking blood pressures, stitching up wounds, and on one occasion we had a great big black guy, great big fella. And he'd been throwing his weight around in the prison, and about half a dozen blokes had grabbed him and razored him. They didn't just cut him a little bit; they cut him all over his back, all over his stomach, all over his arms. There must have been. It took me and another hospital officer about 3 hours to stitch him up. Must have put him in about 200 stitches, maybe more than that, all over his body. And he was a big muscular guy, so when they cut him, it had split open. The wounds it took some stitching up. But we did that, and he was perfectly all right. He was obviously in a great deal of pain, but I don't think he went back to his bullying ways after that. I think he got the message. Numerous duties such as that fell to the hospital staff. But the one part of the hospital service that was, in those days, in the 70s and 80s, essential to the system was the administration of chlorpromazine or Largactil, which was drawn up at the instructions of a doctor. I didn't do it willy-nilly, didn't just go to the drugs cupboard, open it up and pull up a syringe full of chlorpromazine. Didn't do that. You got the instructions from a doctor, usually written instructions, and then if the inmates were having a psychotic episode, then they were held down and the chlorpromazine was administered by syringe straight into the upper outer quadrant of the buttocks. I usually did the right upper outer quadrant, and of course they wouldn't feel anything. I wasn't doing it to hurt them, doing it to help control them, because inmates that get out of control not only injure other people but injure themselves. And as I say, if the doctors believed that they were in such a serious psychotic episode, that they would order that, and then once you'd done that, you dragged them off to the padded cells. At Strangeways, there were 2 properly padded cells. They consisted of plastic walls, plastic seats, all plastic, and all you had in there was a plastic pot and a heavy-duty blanket. That's a blanket that's about 1/4 of an inch thick. You couldn't rip it, and it's been stitched, very tightly stitched together, so that it wouldn't rip. because otherwise, people would very likely attempt to use the blanket to hang themselves, which is a sad state of affairs when you think about it. But that was the end game at Strangeways. If you didn't behave on the landings and kicked up, next thing you know, you'd be down the block. If 10 minutes with the school bully didn't subdue you, and you continued to cause a nuisance, and the doctors may decide that you're going through a phase that needed to be controlled by medication. And that's when the hospital staff stepped in. Numerous inmates had to be subdued in such a manner, one of them being Paul Sykes. He was making a right nuisance of himself on the landings, slapping people about a bit. He got grabbed and was injected with Largactil. The chemical name is chlorpromazine. So anyway, that's what was then. Now we've got qualified nurses who've done like 3 or 4 years training or whatever it is. They've got to do a nursing degree, haven't they? But back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you didn't do a nursing degree. You actually did. You learned how to be a nurse by being a nurse. So you'd be a trainee nurse on the wards in the hospital. And once you'd done that for, I think it was 3 years, then you could become a registered nurse. I think RGN, registered general nurse. A state registered nurse, SRN, or a staff nurse. Like that's how it worked then. But in the prisons, they didn't have any nurses other than the hospital officers. We ran the wards. I ran the ward at Strangeways for about 18 months, a year. And you get people coming in, and you'd write psychiatric reports on them, observations, and speak to the psychiatrists when they came in to assess them, and generally did the job properly. It wasn't just a case of going in there and taking the money and letting it go. You had to actually do the job. Now then, that's the song dinger, folks, but it's not a song. There's a new film out. It's called the Barbie film or something. That's a warning now. Grab your goat and go for it, yeah? So, there's a Barbie film out at the moment. It looks ridiculous to me. I shan't be going to see it. But it reminded me that I'd written a poem about the Barbie dolls. It's called Toy Boy Blues. I have read it on here before, but it's a while ago now, so I'll read it again. Seeing as they brought this film out, it'll be in people's minds, won't it? Toy Boy Blues by John G. Sutton. Barbie and Cindy are dollies, with dresses and ribbons to wear, long flowing curls that are golden. They make a spectacular pair. Young children, they like to play with them, pretend that they go to the ball. They go to the races or golfing, and always enjoying it all. Now, Derek and Ken are the boy dolls, with curly dark hair and tight pants. The children, aware of the difference, give Barbie and Cindy a chance. That night the disco was crowded. Derek and Ken danced the twist. Barbie and Cindy danced with them. At midnight, the two couples kissed. Next morning was cold for the dollies. Both Barbie and Cindy looked sick. They had made an awful discovery. Neither Derek or Ken had a dick. Now, people, this tale has a moral, a lesson for us and for them. It's the dollies that get all the toy boys, but it's women they get all the men. Troy Boy Blues by John G. Sutton. Tales from the Jails, folks. And don't forget to get my book. It's here. There it is. On Amazon. HMP Manchester Prison Officer. Part 2.